Hey guys, so MagSorc got nerfed pretty hard with the Murkmire patch this past patch, and so a lot has changed with builds. But I've had this build for about a week and a half now, and it seems to perform not quite as well as what we were doing last patch, but I think it's probably about as good as we can get for this patch considering shield nerfs and everything. So let's go ahead and get started. So for gear, I'm running 5 Bright Throat, so 2 body pieces, 3 jewelry. This isn't leveled all the way up to gold yet, but it's what I have. So all of the enchants on here are Magicka recovery, and all are arcane as well. Then I'm running 5 Armor Master, 3 body pieces, and then I'm running a restoration staff on the back bar with infused, with the weapon damage buff increase. Then front bar, I'm running Inferno staff with infused as well and shock damage. So basically, the way this works, Armor Master, when I use a weapon or armor ability, I will get a massive buff to physical and spell resist. As you can see, it's 5.2k for 10 seconds, so that's longer than my shield will last. So basically every time I use my shield, my light armor shield on my back bar, I get a massive buff to spell resist. So it's great because that allows you to run a master staff on the front bar, and since we're not running Shackle Breaker, we can run Dummy House and Infernal Guardian just to get our max stats up a little bit. So basically for these I'm running infused on my big pieces, and impen on 2 small pieces, well fitted on the other 2. I used to run more well fitted, and I really like this trait actually. It's super useful to keep your stamina up, because if your stamina goes down on a MagSorc, that's usually pretty detrimental, and that's what gets you killed a lot. So this is nice. 2 impen, it seems a little low probably for most of you guys, but I'll show in a second. With your resist buffed up all the way and with shields, you don't really need it that much higher. If you wanted to make this build a little bit tankier, I would just swap out the well fitted for impen, or maybe swap out infused for impen, but it works pretty well. I think the well fitted and infused help a lot to just get your max stats up and keep your stamina good. So basically, for bar, I'm using front bar, using Hardened Ward, still your staple shield for Sorcs, even though it got nerfed. So in Cyrodiil, and this is non-CP, I pretty much only play non-CP, so you're still getting a 8.5k shield, which is not too bad, but you got all the resistances from this build on top of that. Flame Reach as a CC with the Master Staff deals a lot of damage, stuns. It makes it a bit harder to fight Dragon Knights with this, but if you're playing with a group in BGs, you can kind of counter that. Still have Dawnbreaker and a couple other things to deal with them, but you usually don't want to try and 1v1 a Magicka Dragon Knight with Flame Reach. Frags and Endless Fury. I like Endless Fury over the Wrath, since you get a bit more Magicka. You could use Wrath if you want as well. Both of those work pretty nicely. And then I'm using Deep Thoughts for sustain. You could use Dark Conversion. It's decent. I've tested it out a little bit. I still like Deep Thoughts more because you can just streak away in a fight and just get all your stats back. And I don't really like that Dark Conversion uses stamina, since stamina is pretty important on a Sorc, like I said. And your stamina is a little bit lower, considering you're not running all well fitted and you're not running Shackle Breaker with this build. Then Dawnbreaker on the front bar, super good just to give a lot of burst damage onto a target. So yeah, it's a pretty stable skill. Back bar using Harness Magicka, so this is why this build works right here. So whenever you use Harness Magicka, it will buff, you'll get that Armor Master buff to get your physical and spell resistance up a lot for 10 seconds. So basically it lasts longer than what your shield is up, which is nice, so you have a 4-second leeway there. But I'll show you that in a second. But your resists go through the roof when you use all of this. And then Boundless Storm, back bar. Your major expedition for this got nerfed by 3 seconds, so makes you a little bit slower, but you don't have that buff up as long. But the physical, the major resolve and major ward are really nice. They buff your resistance a lot, and that helps this build work even better. And Haunting Curse. You could run this on the front bar instead of Deep Thoughts. It would buff your damage a tiny bit, not really that much, but I like to run this on the back bar just because of how my bar setup was last patch, and I'm used to my key bindings on there. Streak, you could also use the other morph, Ball of Lightning, if you wanted a little bit more resistance to projectiles, but Streak is pretty good as well. And then I used to run Healing Ward right here for my heals, but with all the bleeds this patch and the Oblivion damage, since Healing Ward got the nerf to the healing at the very beginning of the shield use, you don't really have as much to combat bleed damage and Oblivion damage. So Mutagen is just nice to have on your bar. It heals teammates as well, which is quite nice. It removes the dots once it gets consumed. So I think this is a much better skill for this patch. You still could run Healing Ward if you really want to, but considering all the Oblivion damage right now on Battlegrounds especially, Mutagen I think is a pretty good replacement. And I'll show in a second as well. With all the resistances and stuff, you don't really need Healing Ward. It'll help. Probably use that for maybe duels. It'll be a little bit more useful. But Mutagen for BGs, where there's just tons of dots on you the whole time, and half of your death recap is Oblivion damage, you may as well just use Mutagen. Then Charged Atronach, I use that on my back bar. You could also use the Resto ult, but I feel like the Atro is pretty good for team fights and certain game modes and BGs where you're trying to capture a flag or something and just holding a position. It's really nice for that. Probably wouldn't use it for deathmatch as much. Resto ult's probably better for that, but I really like the Atro actually, so that's kind of a preference thing on there as well. Same thing with Dawnbreaker. You could use Meteor and that would work pretty much as well. That's similar, does a pretty similar thing, but I like Dawnbreaker. It's nice and cheap and helps with your burst. Alright, so if you go to your back bar right now, your resistances are pretty normal, but then if you use Boundless Storm, use Light Armor Shield, you can see get 25k spell resist, 23k physical resist, and then that will be on top of 2 shields, and then on top of your armor as well. So I only have 500 crit resist, but once everything gets buffed with the shields, your resists are so high it doesn't really even matter. I think the well-fitted and infused are a little bit more useful for what this build essentially does. So going back, your spell damage 1600 is a lot lower than what I would prefer it to be, but with the changes to Sorc this patch, you need to build a little tankier. You still can kill people fine, so I haven't really noticed it that much, but it's not as high as what I would ideally like. So if you have sustain, or if you have no problem sustaining, maybe you could swap one of your enchants. Instead of running all Magicka Recovery, you could run spell damage, but I like the Magicka Recovery on there. So we have 2300 Magicka Recovery, so that's without Lich or anything, just straight with Bright Throat. And we're not running a Mundus Stone. We're running the Apprentice. Since our spell damage is low, Apprentice will help buff that up a little bit. A Vampire as well, this is kind of optional. I think the Magicka Recovery and Stamina Recovery bonuses from that are pretty worth it. But if you wanted to not have Vampirism, it's not a big deal. And I'm a High Elf, so if you want it to be Dark Elf, Argonian, Breton, pretty much all of those work nicely too. Maximum Magicka with all this is 3600, or 36,000, excuse me. Health. Armor Master will make our health a little bit larger on the back bar. So if you go to front bar, you see it drops a little bit. Stamina is just under 10k in Cyrodiil and Battlegrounds. So it's not as high as you might want it. So you could use a stamina glyph if you wanted to buff that up a little bit. but it's pretty good. With the well fitted, that really helps to reduce roll dodge costs, plus with the light armor changes to sprint costs, that's helpful as well. But basically, with the shield and resistance changes, or I guess shield changes, and if you buff your resistance up all the way, you're pretty tanky. So it's pretty hard to die if you have all your buffs up. The main problem is if you get stunned a lot and have a lot of pressure on you, then it's a little bit hard, but that's pretty much the way it's always been with MagSorcs. So yeah, basically, guys, when you're playing this, I'll put some gameplay footage after this, but pretty much a similar way to we've been playing in BGs for ages. You know, just use your buffs, try and burst on people. Flame Reach is good as your CC and as your spammable, and it's nice and a lot cheaper when you're using the Master Staff, so I'd definitely make sure that you have this. You could also use a Oblivion glyph instead of shock damage on the front bar, but I mean, it works for now, but once the dots get changed, so the enchants don't get procced on single target dots, then shock damage will definitely be the way to go. So I'd probably stick with shock damage for this patch. And it procs Implosion, which helps a lot. And if I didn't go over it already, I have full magic enchants on everything. So that's the build. I'll put some gameplay footage after this so you guys can see. Oh, and I forgot for that, for potions, I'm running all tripods. I think those are probably the best potions for BGs. Just you're basically using them off cooldown most of the time. Some of the time you want to wait, but a lot of the time you have to use them off cooldown. With what I've noticed with Bright Throat, it gives a ton of sustain, but for the most part, you don't really have sustain issues unless you're spamming stuff too much until your potion cooldown is off. So if you use a pot, you're going into battle, you use a pot, once your sustain gets a little bit lower, you use the pot, it goes back up, and then it seems like for the most part your sustain is pretty good until right at the end, before your pot's about to, the cooldown comes off and you can use your potion again. That's when your sustain really goes down. So the way the pots work, if you just time it out nicely, you really don't have sustain issues too badly for this patch, and if you have to, that's why you have Deep Thoughts on your bar, so you can just streak away and use that. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. I will post the gameplay footage after this. See you later.